All right, welcome back to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast. It's Tuesday night. We're going over some golf. I'm here as usual with my golf buddies here. You got Colin and Pete. What's going on, fellas?
Hey, Pete. Congratulations on getting your equity back at the live final last time. I've yet to attend my first one, but I'm glad that you could represent FantasyLabs pretty well. How did it going for you over there?
Oh, it was fun, man. The Playboy Mansion is probably my favorite venue of all the live finals, and might have been I don't know if it's going to be the last one, but the Playboy Mansion actually got sold yesterday. We're recording this on Tuesday night, but it actually got sold to the ex-Twinkies owner or something like that.
Oh.
We'll see. We have another final there, but it's always a tremendous time. Great to see people in the industry, and it was a really fun time. I had in LA, and actually just got back from Vegas like 10 minutes ago, and had a great time there too. So happy to be back, I guess, on the grind. But it's been a fun couple days with the Playboy Mansion in Las Vegas.
That sounds like you got your DJing on just fine. That sounds like a great weekend.
Oh yeah, living the dream. But pumped for PGA, and the U.S. Open is getting close. So we have the warm up for the St. Jude. But a lot of exciting stuff going on in the golf world.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. We had Bales compete in the Playboy Mansion live final as well. So we had a lot of representation for FantasyLabs. Good weekend. But yeah, let's talk some PGA. We have a full week of a PGA tournament and a Euro tournament, and next week is obviously the U.S. Open, which everyone sort of had their eye on. These majors are obviously the biggest tournaments on DraftKings, and so this is the warm up for some of these guys. And there's actually no Euro event next week because of the U.S. Open. So it'll be an interesting week as we sort of dissect these guys and potentially guys gearing up for the U.S. Open and some not playing in it and how that's going to affect things. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of both the Euro and the PGA tournaments this week, let's just take a moment to sort of look back at last week and what we learned last week being the Memorial Tournament. Colin, what were some takeaways? We had a bunch of the top guys up there. We had J.B. Holmes, we had Rory, Stormon, and Dustin Johnson, who is playing this week. Obviously, finished very well, but then we had some lower guys that ended up winning it. So, what were your takeaways last week?
You missed the only name that I was banking on the whole time, Emiliano Grillo. Like, you should have, honestly, Bryan, that one time you should have batted it off with it. You've done this enough times. Mm-hmm. He was one of two guys that I thought about a lot for different tangential reasons. Emiliano Grillo and Matt Kuchar were the guys that I thought about this the most. Both had pretty good finishes, and both are really high in, like, kind of these, like, I'm starting to really look into supplementary metrics, things like consistency and safety and all of these, like, supplementary, just beyond, like, essentially the number that FantasyLabs spits out. Matt Kuchar is what I consider, everybody considers him a safe play and is very expensive. I would consider Grillo a relatively safe play despite his results at his price. And I'm openly wondering, is there a difference between expensive safe players and cheap safe players? And in the scheme of things and roster construction, which are more important? I'm diving into this a lot. I have started probably the most serious lineup review I have since I've started playing PGA, now that I have a decent sample size of 20 tournaments to go back on with the help of FantasyLabs historical data. And I'm really starting to dive into this stuff. And I don't want to jump to any conclusions yet, but I think there's a huge opportunity for even just like to refine cash game lineup process and how to understand which of these metrics are important beyond just essentially expected points. Pete, I know you consider a lot beyond just what goes into the model and kind of subjective factors and differentiating between players, between contest types. It's my goal to develop metrics that reflect those kind of soft factors like safety versus upside versus all of these other course fit versus how much does that matter in cash versus GPP. What do you think the newest frontiers are in terms of quantifying some of those stuff that you like in terms of like lineup roster construction for the type of game that you would like to see, like essentially a more data-driven process on?
For cash games, you hit on it. I mean, you want to be able to find the cheap guys. I think you'll find that those guys have more value just because, the cheap, expensive guys, or not the cheap, I'm sorry, the expensive guys who are safe, maybe they make a couple more cuts than the other top tier guys that might have more upside. but there's a huge discrepancy with the value guys, and I think that's critical in cash games. I do think that the big thing that I want to see just with data is figuring out which guys are more appropriate for cash in tournaments and really being able to quantify that. Someone that, I've played a good amount of in cash lately is Molinari. But if you look at him, he's been making so few birdies that he's not really a great tournament play by any stretch. And, you can start looking at, is he even a good cash game play if he's not making a lot of birdies? So I think that there's a variety of things that we can look at and get better with. But I do think that you kind of are hitting on something with these cash game guys who are cheaper that are more consistent. I think there's so much value in that. And everyone wants to take these guys who make a lot of cuts, but can we figure out predictive stats to figure out which guys are going to make a lot more cuts? Especially with the smaller samples, like Griot's a really interesting example. Curious your thoughts on Justin Thomas. So that I played a good bit of Justin Thomas, and a couple of my friends who are really sharp told me that was a terrible play, and we touted him a lot last week. And I think you said he was one of your favorite plays, Colin. And basically the thought process around him being a terrible play is that he's great on courses where he can hit anything but driver off the tee, but as soon as he starts hitting driver off the tee, he's so wild that he really gets penalized for courses where you have to be accurate. And with the rough last week, people were saying that was a terrible play. So curious your thoughts on Justin Thomas last week.
Interesting. That is as a scenario that makes sense in terms of, all right, I could buy that as a type of spot where you want to fade. The challenge from my end is how do you pick up on that from the data? You have kind of first pass things like course fit, like, oh, did he not rate well as course, on a course fit type of, given his key stats. I don't know that course fit would necessarily pick up on something like that. But if that's something that I'm not capturing, that's a question of, all right, what in the given information that we have could lead us to that same conclusion. He was still high in him. I mean, he was kind of a 50-50, do I go with him in cash last week or not? I ended up not going with him. Not to get too results oriented, but that's kind of, he's come up on too many times for me to wonder, am I mistaken for having him so high? And if I am, what mistake am I making? Right. The other one I wanted to kick back to you on that same note, as far as expensive safe guys versus cheap expensive guy, or expensive safe guys versus cheap expensive guys. Matt Kuchar was about 40 to 50% owned in the double ups. He was an expensive safe guy. Is the field making a mistake?
I think, for cash games, I thought he ended up on my cash game team. I thought, for an expensive guy at that course, where there's just not, a tremendous amount of birdie opportunities. There were a good amount, but it's not. And I guess the scores finished pretty low. But it's not like a course where you're just going and thinking, okay, someone's going to win this at 20 under or something, where it's just so easy to score. Where Rory, looking at him as an expensive guy, he has so much upside. Jason did. These guys make so many birdies that I think you have to pick your spots with them. Obviously, they're great tournament plays every single week, but to justify paying that absolute top-tier price, it's a challenge. I think Kuchar last week was a combination of safety and then price. He was only 9,900 versus all these other guys because you have the big three in there. You got a really nice savings with him and could go with a more balanced roster construction, which I think a lot of people are tending to do in cash. So
right, and I agree that they should, but I'm not necessarily so. I've kind of assumed balance for cash is kind of the intuitive thing that you want to do, but we've kind of touched on it before. I think it far more depends on who else is available to you in the field. And
I feel stupid saying that. The scoring was really good, and you can score well in the par fives, but I feel like there's some other courses where you just expect a tremendous amount of birdies, and you expected a good amount, but it wasn't okay, just load up on the guys who make the most birdies kind of week last week. But I guess I should be doing that every single week given how DraftKings sets up, and that's the thing I'm trying to adjust for a little bit more.
Yeah. So I'm far more interested in kind of putting metrics to all of those concepts that we just discussed and really differentiating between appropriate players for game selection.
Right.
Colin, why do you think Kuchar was a bad play at 50%?
Because I'm always wondering if it's a mistake to pay that. At what point are you essentially overpaying for safety? It's the hypothetical. I've seen Kuchar at 11,000 before. Would he have been a mistake at 11,000? Would he build a mistake at 11.5? What about 10.5? 9,900, when the big three are there, yeah, I get it. But I think in theory, if people are price insensitive to safety level, in theory, that's a mistake that the field is making. I have yet to see if that's an actual mistake that they're making, or even if that's a real mistake that they're making. But I was just throwing it out there as a hypothetical.
Yeah, it seems like there's an edge in finding safety right now, just because the Vegas odds. Like I did a study actually earlier today where I looked at MLB batters in DFS, and what my finding was is that you don't have to sacrifice safety to get upside in your lineups. You can take a guy in cash games, like you had asked last week about power hitters. Do you want power hitters in cash games? And the answer is you can get both safety and upside in lineups. But it seems like in golf DFS, you can't necessarily have both because of how closely correlated odds are with salaries. So you can easily identify upside just based on salary, but finding the safety is maybe a harder thing to find. So maybe there's an edge there. So that's an interesting conversation. Okay. All right, let's move on to our next segment, which is going to be talking about the Euro Tour. And I think, Colin, we're going to lean on you a little bit on this one again. So with this one, this week's tour is the Lyoness Open. Used to be the Austrian Open. So as you can guess, it takes place in Austria. And Colin, I'll kick to you. What sort of course is this, and who you're looking at this week?
So course fit. And I have yet to see if this is a recurring trend here, but course fit tends to be a little bit weaker, yet again, on the Euro Tour. But for how much it is, maybe like half of a typical PGA course fit in terms of plus or minus. But the people that seem to get an edge here are accurate drivers and bad putters, which is kind of a theme that we've seen in a couple PGA courses as well. There's a decent amount of course history to parse through here, especially at the top of the leaderboard, and even at the bottom to some degree, depending on how much you want to weight it. In general, I'll be looking at, like I said, accurate drivers and bad putters to get a slight boost. If I just kind of want to roll down the picks, I think Bernd Wiesberger is the class of the field here. Not maybe by a Stenson amount last week in Sweden, but I think he is the clear number one option here, especially if you want to do some vague Euro and home country advantage is something that I'm really interested in exploring. Almost like maybe because we believe that home state advantage exists in PGA Tour, or you live by the course you remember, or something like that. To what degree does that radius extend on the Euro Tour? But you saw it last week with Alex Noren and Henrik Stenson doing so well at a Swedish course. I think Bernd Wiesberger is Austrian, is he not? He is Austrian. So that's a decent subjective angle to cover, but I think he is a top overall option. Just kind of a brief tour of other picks that I like. Just kind of it's the other option I like in the top tier is Gregory Bourdi. Using my newfound emphasis on consistency, I think he could be almost like the Meg Hoosier of the European Tour, where he's probably the most consistent option in the top. I think Magnus Carlsen makes a decent mid-range value play where he's at. And I think you have kind of some of these other interesting flyers. I think Ashun Wu is probably my favorite GPP flyer. He keeps popping in models week after week, and I wanted to wait a little bit more for him to post real results. But I think he's got a decent amount of variance around him, but a very small sample size. But I think he may be benefiting from being unknown at this point. And you also have around the value tier, Florian Fritsch. Fritsch was a guy that popped last week that is popping again. I think I might be onto something. And Renato Paratore is probably my other favorite. He's kind of the Roberto Castro of the Euro Tour, where makes a decent amount of cuts for his price, not a whole lot of upside, but he's the closest approximation we have to that cheap, safe cut maker. So that's the Euro Tour in brief.
I like it. Yeah. So, Pete, real quick before we move on to the PGA, I know you've been playing some Euro Tour in the first couple of weeks, and you like to sort of integrate the data with some things that you watch on TV or just covering the tour, because I know you watch it often. Has it been weird sort of just trusting the data, or have you been able to find some different edges by reading some stuff and picking up some stuff, or is it just all about our models?
So far, it's all about the models and Colin. I mean, I feel pretty lost, to be totally honest, but I'm trying to get better. I think a couple more weeks would be great. tough thing is it's really tough to watch unless you want to stay up all night. I'm already kind of a night owl.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big challenge to watch a lot of Euro golf, but I think it's something that over time you'll learn names more, you'll learn their styles more. I do catch a little bit on the Golf Channel, but yeah, I mean, I think what I've learned a little bit about my overall DFS game is I think I'm pretty decent with data, but I think my subjectivity is relatively strong, and I think certain sports it matters more, certain sports it matters less, and without it, I definitely don't feel like I'm super strong. So Euro, I'm just going to have to get better, but I think we have a huge edge with FantasyLabs. So I've been firing, and it's gone pretty well so far. So can't complain, but definitely don't feel super confident putting in my Euro lineups. It's really, what is FantasyLabs spitting out, and if Colin's nice enough to give me a couple pointers, I think that makes me feel more confident. So definitely, listening back to these to hear what Colin has to say, and relying on FantasyLabs.
Colin, has there been players that you've noticed? Because I know the Euro Tour thing is that there's no shot length data, so there's no strokes gained. Have you seen discrepancies of players that you've been able to identify that people might miss because they've had reliance on the shot length data?
I'm not honestly too in tune into who else is playing whom and why.
Okay.
I'm kind of writing on the assumption that people are going to go off household name recognition in terms of who they're picking. And that assumption, it's only been 2 weeks so far, but it's not necessarily true. I think the people, the number of recommendations and people who are kind of have opinions on the Euro Tour is so small that I would honestly not be surprised if we were influencing ownership percentage to a decent, significant degree. So that brings up all sorts of I don't know what else to do besides all right, I'm going to call him like I see him. I'm not going to worry about ownership. But no, I haven't worried too much about, or I haven't put too much into will anybody be shot length biased essentially.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, let's move on to our PGA tournament this week. Is the FedEx St. Jude Classic. Always got to have that sponsor name on there. So the FedEx St. Jude Classic takes place in Memphis, Tennessee. The course is TPC Southwind. Some recent winners: Fabian Gomez won last year, 13 under. Ben Crane, 10 under the year before. Harris English, 12 under. Our top man this year, Dustin Johnson, won it back in 2012. So those are the last couple of years. I'm really curious. This is something I was really looking forward to this podcast because I want to get y'all's opinion on what this course looks like, because when I did my regular research into course fit and which guys I think would stand out in this course, my answer was kind of just shrug emoji. I don't know. So, Colin, I'll kick to you. Can you enlighten us? Because I'm lost here.
All right. So who is popping a decent amount for this? I think, again, bad putters are probably getting a little bit of an edge here, kind of anecdotally. And then I think the other one, GIR is probably the other one that probably correlates the most, which is kind of a catch-all stat, but I still think it's valuable in terms of predictive stuff. Mm-hmm. But to give you some sample names that are popping decently well: Brooks Koepka, Gary Woodland, Brendan Steele, Patrick Rogers, who I guess is no longer in the tournament.
Steele is out too.
Yeah, he's out too. Hudson Swafford is up there. I guess it seems like it's more of kind of a almost like more of a driving. A lot of these guys like GIR and driving distance are so closely correlated. Sometimes it's tough to pick apart exactly who's doing what and where. But it seems to be I know bad putters are getting a slight boost for sure. Probably maybe just I'd put them probably bad putters maybe it's 2/3 of it, and maybe driving distance and GIR the other third of it. So
bad putters are getting a boost
type of thing. It's this all blend of all right, so everything's important. All right, thanks.
Yeah, that's kind of what I got. So bad putters get a boost is what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the opposite of what I've heard. But
interesting.
What have you heard, Pete?
Well, it's a specific type of Bermuda grass, and they're known as being slippery and relatively fast. So people, other podcasts I've listened to, and just talk around the industry is you want good putters, but I think people say that every week, and I feel like Colin, I don't know. I mean, it's not every week, but Colin seems like when it is a situation where the data from Colin's perspective and what he has shows that bad putters, it seems that that's a big part of his model too. So
yeah, so this is actually hypothetical because this is a good one to dive into. Let's do a thought exercise. So I get why slippery green says you want good putters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's my theoretical. Could you have a green that is so slippery that it turns a completely random? What if they're putting on a glacier? Would you still want good putters, or would the surface be so essentially random at that point that it would nullify the advantage of good putters?
That makes sense. It's just it's interesting. I think the other argument too is that Bermuda grass plays differently than other grasses. So I think that maybe finding the guys who putt well in Bermuda grass could be the thing, and maybe devaluing the guys who aren't, or not devaluing, but like you said, giving a slight bump to everyone else. Relatively makes sense because it is tougher to putt on these screens.
How do you do that, though?
Grass type is one of those where it's I believe that's kind of like an angle that's worth pursuing. It's not, I mean, in theory, you should be able to pick that type of thing up, but because there's not that many grass types, there's 3 or something like that for greens. It's something manageable.
Right.
It's just putting is such an inherently noisy part of the game to begin with that it's just, I don't know. I think that I sneakily suspect that people could be coasting on kind of truisms, but it's a fast green, so you want good putting.
I absolutely believe that's true. I think people say putting is really important every week, even on the weeks where I think it's clear that it's not, and the data backs up. It's interesting. I was curious to hear what your assumption.
Yeah, again, I was I have no bias here. I'm just going the numbers are what the numbers are.
So, Pete, you said that sometimes it might help to find which guys play better on which grass. How do you even find that sort of stuff?
Yeah, you have course history, and that's where some of the subjective stuff where they play, where they're members, where they grew up. A lot of Florida courses, a lot of courses down south of Bermuda grass. It just depends. I need to do a little bit more research specifically into that, because that's one thing I was going to do is look at this. Which players have played well. And a lot of the same things happen where what you hear a lot about from other people is trying to find similar comps, not direct course history with this course, but finding courses or tournaments that play similar. And you'll hear a lot of people compare the courses that have the same type of grass. So that's something that I'm trying to get better at, trying to learn a little bit more about. And I think it certainly could help. But it does make sense. I think Colin brings up a really nice point. If the greens are supposed to be really quick and fast, that could just create a lot more variance for everyone. And even the great putters could be 3-putting a lot. So that could make it less valuable. So it's an interesting week. It's only a par 70. There's only 2 par 5s. Some of the par 4s are really long. Just looking at it, hole 5, 485 yards, hole 7, 482 yards, hole 10, 465 yards, hole 17, 490, 18, 453. Those are long par 4s. So curious on the driving distance, because obviously normally when you're thinking a bomber's course, you're thinking 4 par 5s, just long holes everywhere. But it's one of those spots where these par 4s, you definitely want those guys who have some distance because, the holes are really long on the par 4s. So that's what I'm seeing on the course fit is trying to find potentially some guys who are long. I've heard that accuracy is not quite as important, although there is a lot of water. So you don't get crushed for, hitting it outside of the fairway, but you will get crushed for really spraying the ball. So these are a lot of subjective things. I was just curious to hear Colin's, point, but I think you do want the guys who hit the ball a little bit farther this week. Is that popping at all for you, Colin?
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of everything. There's similar, I'm kind of looking at guys who are otherwise similar and off, and a couple I don't know, the interesting edge case for me is Brooks Koepka is rating a lot better in course fit than Charles Howell, and they're both broadly similar in a lot of categories. The only thing they're difference on is driving accuracy, and how he's 3 percentage points worse, but rating a lot worse in course fit. So it really is almost one of everything type of thing this week, which kind of explains your emoji shrug of a course fit about what's going on. So
I think a lot of people
really my least satisfying course fit ever, because I'm the guy that says, well, everything's important. Right? Oh, thanks, science. Glad you could pick that one up.
Yeah.
Right.
So Pete made a good point here, Colin, that it's a long course, but it might be a differently long course in that it's not about like, we just see a long distance of the total course, whatever the distance is. We just think, okay, this is going to be long par 5, so the Bombers are going to need to get out their driver, and that's going to be important. But is there a difference in sort of like length? You could have a long course, but it's sort of average par 5s, but really long par 3s. Is that something that you can look at, or the data can capture, and that sort of adjusts how you measure or distance and the importance of it?
Yeah, I think if there are ever course that had especially long par 3s, I think CourseFit would probably struggle to pick something that up. Like, how good are you with your 4-iron or something like that? Because like 4-iron is not if you had to pick up like, all right, here's your conventional stats, who's good at hitting it like 200 yards with their iron, there's not a whole lot in here that's what it would be.
Strokes gained.
I completely agree. Like, if you have you basically need to be able to measure like the red zone type of like strokes gained type of thing. And if that's like increasingly, I believe that strokes gain data probably it's going to be more useful at some courses than others. Mm-hmm. You'd have the same problem on the Euro Tour, obviously, but yeah, that's kind of where that's the only place you could get it. And I guess PGA Tour is getting better about I guess they started breaking up tee to green into subsections now as part of their official stats. Mm-hmm. It's from long iron, off the tee, around the green. It's encouraging to see they're getting more granular with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't change my concerns with the availability of ShotLink data, emerging data sources, and all of that. But yeah, in theory, I agree. You can only get 4-iron play from strokes gained, essentially.
Right. And I think that's the key too. I mean, I think, like Colin said, for our product at FantasyLabs, we needed to have all the data available and be able to model it and not have inconsistency with our data. So I think we set up an amazing product. I think that you can gain a ton from it every single week. And certain weeks, it's just the gospel for me. But certain times, I mean, you have to go out there and find other information. I think golf is more like that than almost any sport, and that's finding some of the subjective angles, finding potentially some shot link. Like for instance, like the example Colin gave, there's long par 3s, of course, that's applicable one week, and it's not applicable for the next 3-4 weeks. So you have to be willing and able to adjust week to week with your process. And I think the models is definitely the place that I start first, and is the most critical part. But trying to find all those other edges, I think, is a big part of DFS golf.
Yeah, and maybe another place you can look is our free trends tool for PGA. There's a lot of cool things in there. You can create trends for both PGA and Euro. Currently free, so go check that out. Maybe what we need in our trends tool is very specific stuff. Dustin Johnson has a +3 plus minus when he hits his 4-iron. That's what we need.
Exactly.
That's specific. We can just measure that. All right, cool. One last question before we get to our tier of players, because I think this is something that was a really interesting conversation when we were talking before the Masters tournament, and something that you guys had to debate a little bit. So I'm curious, we can just revisit this real quick. We talked about leading up to the Masters. Some guys just approach the week before differently because they're just looking forward to the major that's ahead of them. I don't know if the Masters is sort of revered a little bit differently than these other majors. Maybe the U.S. Open, they just, Dustin Johnson isn't going to be looking ahead as much as he would for the Masters or something. But I do want to revisit that sort of idea and whether that's going to change anything. Pete, I'll start with you because I'm curious.
Right in the wheelhouse. Well, it happened last year, and it happened with Dustin Johnson, who was a very popular pick. I remember a lot of people had him. I faded him, which was very fortunate because he was right there in my lineup. And he started off the first day, bogey, 3 bogeys in a row. And then all of a sudden he said he was sick and he withdrew. So it's already happened. So there's a concern here, taking someone like DJ, who's 12-8, who has the win obviously in 2012 and is clearly the best golfer by a large margin in this field. But I don't know. There's definitely more incentive for these guys who are not, this is a classic spot where if someone's, not doing well, I just see them mailing it in because they can then go to Oakmont and get ready for the U.S. Open. So, what you just explained, it happened exactly last year. He withdrew 9 holes into the tournament because of that bogey start. And, people are saying he withdrew because of an illness, but everyone knows he withdrew because he was done. Like, he's just wanting to go. He's like, I'm not going to make the cut. I'm ready to move on.
Colin, rebuttal.
No, I'm not necessarily disagreeing. And in fact, the withdrawal bug, I guess, is fortunate in that it's hit early in the tournament. We have 5 withdrawals as of Tuesday night so far. There's probably going to be more coming. The mid-tournament withdrawal is always something that you can't necessarily plan for in data. I don't think you could, even if I was asked to come up with a probability of withdrawal, I think that's such a noisy concept that that's not something you can essentially model for. In thinking about what may have influenced people last year, and I was reading about this a little bit, it was pretty rainy last year, right? It wasn't just bad course conditions. Nobody really wanted to play that much anyway. I think it would tilt people in favor of withdrawing if it's just kind of a garbage tournament at some point. You're like, why am I here already? Because we don't worry enough about weather from week to week as is, right? All right, let's make it even more important and try to get into that kind of metagame type of thing. But yeah, I think there's A, the withdrawal factor, and B, are people going to tinker with their game at the top level more or less than Augusta? I'm kind of openly curious if Oakmont is something that you can necessarily tinker specifically for instead of Augusta, because Augusta is a known quantity, right? It's at the same location. You can essentially optimize your game around a course that's not going to change. Whereas Oakmont, I'm guessing a lot of these guys haven't played it before, right? It's not on the regular circuit. It's a U.S. Open course, right? It's not like they get heavy exposure to it. Is that something that you could – they have some information going into it. Pete, do you think an Oakmont type course where it's just no one's ever played of it is something that people would tweak their games for specifically, or is that more of an Augusta thing?
Well, like we talked about with Phil Mickelson before, he said he's hitting shots preparing for Augusta. I don't think people know exactly what shots they're going to hit. I'm sure some of these guys do, because I'm sure some of these guys have played this course a good bit, but it's definitely not like Augusta in my opinion. I think that there's a very specific preparation that a lot of these guys have. A lot of guys have very set routines that they do every year, or they're even adjusting their routine because it didn't work the previous year. I think that there's a lot more, I wouldn't say preparation, but I think people are just, more mentally prepared. They know what they need to be doing to get ready for the Masters. At least they have a plan for it. Where the U.S. Open, I'm sure that these guys absolutely do, but I don't think it's the same as the Masters. So we'll see what happens. Obviously all the big guns are all prepping for it. They're getting ready now. But, the guys who are playing here, I think, someone like Phil Mickelson says he plays every week before a major because that's the thing that's going to give him the most sharp. So it's tough, but I definitely think it's not like the Masters where, Phil Mickelson doesn't care the week before. He'll hit driver when he should hit 3-wood because he wants to hit a shot that's going to be similar to what it's like at Augusta.
Okay, fair enough. Who's got first on the top tier? I got a specific question for whoever it is.
I think, Pete, you're up this week for top tier.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure the question regards the guy, the web.com guy who's 9,000. What's his face?
Wesley Bryan?
Wesley Bryan has just been crushing the web.com, but has no PGA stuff, and he's 9,000, which is crazy. But go. What's the question about the top?
All right, so we'll break our tiers. That is one guy I'm wondering about, and then a sort of follow-up question, and I really just want to hit on this guy because we've been talking about him, Dustin Johnson. I want some practical advice for our listeners. I'm going to hold you guys accountable to this. What are you doing with Dustin Johnson? You have the withdrawal last year. He's such a heavy favorite, such a talent disparage between him and the other guys. What do you do?
I think for me, the approach is I'm not sure what my cash game construction is going to be exactly this moment. I think I'll probably be a little more balanced. I probably won't have DJ, but it's possible. I think where I'd be more likely to have exposure to Dustin Johnson is the higher stakes tournaments. If you want to play that game, I think if you're firing Dustin Johnson in these low stakes tournaments where it's a really top heavy prize, you're probably not doing it right because he's going to be so heavily owned because he's him and Phil Mickelson are by far the most recognizable names in the field. So inherently they're going to be very heavily owned. But yeah, I think the play with him is if you like him, which I have every reason to love him based on his stats and just how much better he is than everyone else in this field. I think you play him in a higher stakes tournament. The other thing is, like we talked about, if there's anyone who's going to withdraw, maybe it's DJ, although I don't know if he can withdraw back-to-back years. Does is he less likely to withdraw because he withdrew last year? Like, is he going to screw this tournament over twice in a row? I don't know. So he's definitely an interesting guy. He's going to be heavily owned. So, however you play, take that into account. And for cash games, I really just think it comes down to roster construction. And for me so far, I'm not seeing a ton of guys I love that are really cheap that I can trust in my cash games. So I love a lot of guys in like the 7K range, which seems to happen a lot. So most likely will not have Dustin Johnson, but we'll see.
Interesting. Colin, I guess we'll treat Dustin Johnson as his own tier before we get to this next one. So Colin, real quick before we move on, I want your approach on Dustin Johnson this week because he is sort of where you have to start.
Yeah. So my bar is probably higher for these top tier guys. And the question from a data perspective is, could you justify rostering Dustin Johnson? And in this case, yes, I think he is on average expected to do well enough more than the rest of the top tier guys to justify his price. It's a combination of, withdrawal. I don't count withdrawals as part of course history because withdrawals are just that. Like, they're essentially like a random event that does not reflect a golfer's true history at a course. So throughout the withdrawal, he has really great course history here, including a win in 2012. He has 3 top 5 finishes in the last 5 tournaments or so. I think he's playing all around better golf than Jordan Spieth right now. So he's basically doing a guest spot in the big 3 in terms of his level of play. For some of the top tier guys, he is far more consistent than someone maybe Rory or Jason Day, whose expected points comes from maybe 1 in 10 or a 1 in 5 explode for 120 plus points. So he has everything going for him that says, yes, you could conceivably you could find the data driven reasons to roster him in cash. Now that all depends again on how much you like the lower tier, and some of the withdrawals directly, most notably Brendan Steele and Patrick Rogers, directly affected the path to rostering Dustin Johnson. And so when some of these value guys start dropping out, it more depends on that. But relative to my normal stance, I don't hate rostering the top guy nearly as much as I do most weeks.
Yeah, I like him. So for instance, the 1K or the Thunderdome or something, he feels like a great play to me. We'll just see in cash. I mean, it's going to come down to some of these guys. Maybe I'll get really sold on some of them, but I definitely think he's a better play than a lot of these guys in the top. There's a couple guys, I guess, which is a good segue that I really like in the top. I think Koepka is a phenomenal play this week. Colton Nost is interesting. I tend to like him more because he has been known to risk jelly beans all the time out on the course. So he fits the, I feel connected.
You're coming off a D-Gen week. Your biases are showing. Come on.
Right. Keep it down. But I just like him. I just, you have these biases towards guys, and that's just one of the things, and he's ranking really well in my model. I like Ryan Palmer a lot this week. And that's really kind of it in the top tier. I think Harris English is a phenomenal tournament play. Might find his way into my cash game teams. Obviously, he won here. He's playing a lot better as well. And at 9,900, he's a nice discount relative to some of these guys. So I like him quite a bit as well. But that's kind of it in the top tier. I definitely like Koepka, Palmer, and English the most outside of DJ. And I think that there's, reason to like Mickelson and Woodland too. I think a lot of people are. I mean, right now, the model I made, the top guys in the model are all above 9K. I mean, it's Dustin, Nost, Mickelson, Woodland, Koepka, and Palmer. So I think everyone's in play here. It's just a matter of roster construction. Who are your favorite plays out of this group?
Yeah, and I think we have one player in common in terms of who we like in general, and that's Gary Woodland. I think the only DJ aside, I think the only guys that are showing decent value in terms of their price are Gary Woodland and Charles Howell, who I rate generally higher just because his long-term form says he's basically a cut-making machine, has decent course history here, and I think he had kind of a disappointing Memorial last week, but not too bad. Everybody else is kind of a little bit too like all over the map. I think Colt Knost is just too. I mean, Colt Knost was like 7,000 a while back. Like, it's a pretty big jump, and I know salary movement isn't really a real thing because it's all reflected in the Vegas odds and in the scheme of things. But I think he might be just like 9,700 is probably stretching it a little bit for me. I would strongly prefer Howell over Knost for sure. Other than that, like, Woodland is probably the only other guy that I could, like, he's returning generally enough value to get his way into lineups. Yeah.
So Colin, Pete said that Brooks Koepka is a phenomenal play for him. What's your devil's advocate there?
I don't know. I'd put him as decent. I'd put him as like it's a replacement level play. Like that, I don't hate it necessarily. It's just 11,000 is also like pretty expensive, and so that depends on like. Again, that depends on how many value guys can you find to build around him, and like we haven't like we have yet to get to this tier. I don't know if there's enough there. It's only Tuesday. There's going to be 20 more withdrawals or something insane if current trends continue. But yeah, I think it's a replacement level play. Like, yes, you could do that, but nothing excites me about it or pushes me in that direction.
Fair enough. And this on the lower end of this spectrum, down to 9K. Pete mentioned him earlier. Wesley Bryan. Colin, this is where you can shine. A web.com guy, you can look through the data and interpret it for us. What do we take?
Theory, yes, I could shine, but like he's the web.com's Bryson DeChambeau, and that he has all of like barely cracking like 9 or 10 results so far, and yes, he's killing it on the web.com tour. But what does that actually mean? I've been so snake bitten by guys who have come out of the gate hot. Ali Schneiderjans before him, Alex Noren on the European tour, Austin Cook, who's now grinding onto the web.com tour. Like, I reserve, like, I don't think I'm going to miss out on anything if I don't roster Wesley Bryan. He's still too much of an unknown quantity to me.
That's fair. And Bryson DeChambeau has been massively disappointing after a scorching hot start.
You're not down on him, Pete, are you?
I'm sad. It's depressing to see what's going on with him.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed, he said to his PGA DFS.
He's like your son.
I do. I love him still. I mean, I just think he's fascinating, and there's a lot of things to like about him, but he's been burning money for me and everyone else who's been rostering him.
Long-term shares, though, you're still buying, right?
Long-term shares I'm definitely still buying, but it is the one thing that is showing over and over again, and you've heard other, like, for instance, Knost, who knows Bryson well, he says there's no way he's going to be good around the greens playing with a 6-iron length lob wedge. So there's things that he's doing with his approach, and that's really what's killing him. His ball striking is right there, but these subtle things are not even subtle. These things like his work around the greens are so important. You look at, to use another strokes gain stat, I think Spieth is just head and shoulders above everyone else, like strokes gain around the greens, and Bryson is one of the worst guys on the PGA Tour, and that's going to come back to bite you. So we'll see what happens and what adjustments he makes, but I'm definitely still very bullish on him with his intelligence and his ball striking with his swing.
Yeah, still very young, obviously. So there's hope yet for young Bryson.
Bryson's not even on the slate, and we still talked about him for 3 minutes. I'm going to need like a time clock or something.
So yeah, let's transition to the mid-tier, Colin. Give us the gems.
All right, let's pull up the mid-tier. All right.
This is 8K down to 7K. So 6-9 will be the lower one. So 7 to 8-9. Colin, go ahead.
All right, who do we got this week? All right, interesting name at the top of the mid-tier this week, Chad Campbell, who I have not seen before in a while. I know he's kind of been in the 6K range a while. Probably that expensive because the field is a little bit weaker. But I was trying to look at like what he's done, and it's like why is he popping so hard? Number one, it's definitely a course history thing here. And it's like, and if we're doing a 5-year window, it's 5 for 5 cuts with 2 top 10 finishes. So like, if you believe it's a thing, it's definitely worth it. And then the last 5 starts have just been pretty good. Yeah, there's a missed cut at Wells Fargo, but 39th at Sawgrass, 12th at Byron, 10th at Dina DeLuca. Like, if you believe recent form is a thing, like he's showing all the sign of recent form. So it's 7,800. I think you could absolutely justify him. Francesco Molinari is right there behind him. Using my new, like, you hit it on the head earlier, where I think Molinari is one of those, like, for the level of consistency he shows, at the price he does kind of makes him way easier to build around in cash games. And like it was way easier on O'Neill. It was like in the low 7,000s. But 8,100 here for the consistency you get is still not all that bad, especially considering that like your normal plugins like Luke Donald and Jason Duffner in that same vein are now gone. Hudson Swafford is now in the mid-tier instead of the low tier where I always seem to mention him. But, you know, his run of success continues pretty well. Still hard to find a guy under 8K who can bomb the ball as well as he can. And then, right below him, I guess the other one who's just kind of seems to be there a while is Russell Henley. A little bit expensive. I'd kind of prefer all the guys above him for all the reasons I outlined. But that kind of clears it to the top of the list.
Interesting. Molinari, just looking at, I think he's below average in birdies. Russell Henley is interesting because he's known, at least subjectively, a lot of people just talk about when he's playing well, it's because his putting is so good. I like that. I like all those plays. Campbell's a guy who's really popping for me. Boo Weekley's popping for me, but I'm not sure what I can do with him. The other guy that I'm definitely going to have exposure to is the DFS god, Will Wilcox.
He's up there, yeah.
I like him quite a week. If you look at his results, he tends to beat up these lower fields or these worse fields. So it seems like a good course fit and a good situation. Put him out there with the big boys, he tends to struggle. But I think this is a great spot for him in general. He'd probably be pretty popular because so many DFS guys like him. See a lot of people tweeting about him, but definitely an interesting guy for me. I love Swafford. He's a guy who's actually above average making birdies, which I really value. If you look at some of these guys towards the top of the list, he does really well. An interesting one for me, which I know you normally don't like in general, Colin, but he's ranking not awful, and this is the guy that makes a lot of birdies, but he's missed a decent amount of cuts, is Graham McDowell. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he's still down there for me, especially 8,200. Probably, still probably the worst value, in that whole tier. Definitely the worst value above 8,000.
Makes sense. I thought that would be the case with how you weight guys. Now, I tend to not want to weight Graham McDowell, but I will probably have him in one or two PPPs, but 0% chance on cash.
Why is he down for you, Colin?
He's just always been down for me. I think when in doubt, it's always long-term adjusted round. Why does he have that at the price he does? Mm-hmm. Course history is middling. Recent form isn't necessarily that great. And I think there's a miscut or two on the Euro Tour, which just to me, and even a 65th on the Irish Open, just underachieving on the Euro Tour is a death sentence for me.
That's fair enough.
Pete, how are you dealing with some of this withdrawals? For example, Brendan Steele withdrew, and I thought that he was going to be a pretty popular play at his salary. I think he was pretty underpriced. So with those guys, some of the value guys withdrawing today, is it going to make a guy like Molinari just really chalk?
It could. We'll see where everyone else withdraws. But when players that are valuable go away, obviously people are going to pivot to the other guys. And the other thing is it could change roster construction quite a bit. People might go more stars and scrubs since a lot of these mid-tier values are going away. So you just kind of have to adjust. But one thing I will say about the withdrawals, make sure, more so than any other week, that you are paying attention to who withdraws up until the last minute. I'm going to have to wake up early to make sure.
I'm not looking forward to setting an alarm. I'm on West Coast time, too. It's going to be brutal, but it's absolutely necessary.
This week, you absolutely have to. So I think that's one thing that I think that's the biggest adjustment our listeners should make, is just make sure regardless. I mean, I know it's easy to sleep through, but this week more so than any other week, make sure you're paying attention to that because there's so much more likely. Well, these guys are way more likely in general to withdraw the week before major.
Pete, I had a quick question for you, something you mentioned about Wilcox. You said his tendency to beat up on weaker fields. I go back and forth whether or not that's a real thing in terms of are there guys who play better versus strong fields versus weak fields? Because, the mathematical assumption when you're a golfer is your performance is independent of what everyone else is doing. It's not strictly true in 100% of cases, but it holds up the best in golf, probably of any other sports. And one of those is the quality of the field. So that's my assumption. I know it's wrong somewhere, some of the times, but it's an open question to me. Can you reliably predict when that assumption breaks down? So why do you think it necessarily holds for Wilcox and maybe it doesn't hold for other guys?
I don't know. I think that's a great question. I think it is a tough assumption. And, these guys should play the same. They're just playing, by themselves. But I do think, another subjective angle that I think makes sense is, you're playing with the best golfers in the world and you see them putting up low scores. A lot of these guys are playing to win. They know they have to, go for it more and do things that they might not be comfortable with. Whereas when they're playing a weaker field, they know they have less pressure to make the cut and they feel like they don't have to play out of their mind to compete to win. And then the other thing too, just being a golfer, Will Wilcox, when you're playing with Dustin Johnson and Rory McIlroy or something like that, and you've seen these guys hit the ball 350 yards and, just crushing, going after pins and doing things you can't do, that's got to be mentally frustrating. And I think that is definitely a factor for some of these guys. Some people maybe can play up a little bit, but I think the majority kind of get they get discouraged. I mean, and that was the biggest case of that was when Tiger Woods was in his prime. People who played with Tiger just played so bad. And there's other factors too. I mean, you're playing with bigger field. If you're playing with Tiger, there's going to be a huge crowd around you, which who knows how that adjusts things. But I think there's a lot of factors that, in my mind, make sense. So I'm going to go with it. And I definitely think I'd love to see more data on that. So if we do another project on, I think that'd be really interesting to see just, the correlation that these guys have in weaker fields for stronger fields. But I think there's a consensus from a lot of really sharp PGA guys that Will Wilcox is a good play in these weaker fields. Another guy who comes to mind is Bill Haas. He can play well in any field, but he tends to win these weaker fields in general. So I guess that makes sense because the best golfers aren't there. But there's definitely a couple guys that I tend to gravitate towards in the weaker fields.
Colin, how would you measure strength of a field? I mean, is there data points in our models to measure that? I mean, obviously we
have a field called field strength, and it's based on Sagarin ratings of the golfers in the field. So the heavy lifting is done for us. I mean, I could come at it from a different way as far as all right, where are my own organic derivations of field strength? There's a bunch of different ways you could tackle field strength. You can absolutely measure it. Sagarin ratings are pretty good though, as a quick and a cheap and dirty way of doing it. But yeah, that's kind of the same question as the specialist angle of just because someone what is the year-over-year correlations of weak versus strong fields, and if someone has done it in the past, will they necessarily do it in the future, keeping in mind that you're dealing with such noise to begin with that it's all right, how strong a conclusion could you draw? I just care because all the reasons you described in terms of frustration, all of that. That's absolutely true, and I could buy into that. My only part where I can't get all the way there is why wouldn't that apply for everybody versus Wilcox or Haas, or what is it about that in particular that makes it?
And I think that just comes down to the person. I mean, you've seen it in other things. Certain guys rise to the occasion, and I know this is such subjective crap for the most part, but there are evidence of guys who, they seem to do well with crowds, or the bigger the moment, they can do well, but a lot of times, it's really hard for people to adjust, and they just can't handle it. So it's tough. I hear what you're saying, Colin, and again, I don't have any data to back this up, so I would love to get more data, and that's kind of, this whole process this year with you guys is really trying to get better at PGA and really trying to have a more data-driven approach while still sprinkling in the subjective stuff. And the more I play and the more I learn, I think the data is really important, but really nailing the subjective stuff is, I think, what the best DFS guys are doing, and I'm trying to get better at it. So yeah,
I'm not asking you for proof. I'm more asking you for a research assignment. Here's what I believe. Can you find the data to prove me right or wrong?
Yeah, I would see if you can figure it out with everyone, and then let's see if any guys really stand out. I would love to see which guys, based on the data, stand out the most, where they really struggle in bigger fields, or maybe the money is another thing too. I mean, that's not another thing we haven't talked about either. When the money's bigger, do guys struggle more? Which guys struggle more versus which guys play better? There's just so many subjective things in golf, and confidence and mental focus is a bigger part of golf than any other sport. That I think there's just a lot of these, problems that we can't, are tough to solve. And, sample size is tough in golf too. It's really a fun challenge. I think that's part of the reason DFS golf is going to be a great game forever. DFS NBA, a lot of people have kind of solved it, or at least gotten a lot closer to solving it than a sport like golf. And I think golf's going to continue to be a really big challenge. I think we're doing a good job here at FantasyLabs, kind of pushing towards getting better at, approaching the game. So, Yeah, there's a lot I have to learn, but I learn a lot of this podcast every week, and it's a fun process. So I'll think on that more, Colin, of which guys might be great, and I'll ask some guys around which ones would be interesting to look into.
Yeah, I love to prove or disprove it either way.
Awesome.
Yeah, do it, Colin. So, and I guess this is part of the issue with analyzing golf DFS is in a study like that, you would have to try to take out the other variables. Like you could be playing in a great field, but it could be an awful course fit, and this you sort of have to neutralize something like that, right, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, it's always like I try to account for everything else first, and like you can do that to the best of your ability.
Cool.
It'll definitely help you fit.
Cool. All right. Well, let's finish it up with our lower tier. So this is going to be guys that are 6'9" and lower, and I think this could be really important this week, especially for people who want to go stars and scrubs with DJ. So Pete, I'll kick it back to you. 6'9" and under, who is popping for you?
Camilo Vegas is the guy who's popping the most at 6'9". I think he'll be somewhat popular. I believe he has pretty good course history. Let me just pull over and see if that's the case. Yeah, it looks like he has pretty solid course history, but he's popping for me, and I've heard a couple other people talk about him. I think that, Cameron Percy, you could maybe talk me into. Kyle Stanley is something that's not the worst in my model. Burgoon, I think you could take a shot on. It's a tough week, though, in this range. I mean, you have a really soft field, and then you start looking at some of these guys that are below 7K, and it's terrible. One other guy that I can't quite figure out is Justin Hicks. He's popping well. Colin, any thoughts on any of ththese guys? I'm really struggling in this range.
Let me go down the list here. Stanley, yes. Villegas, probably. Who was the other guy?
I just said Hicks. He's ranking well, and I
Hicks, no. And
Yeah,
then who was the fourth guy? Was a no too. Who was he?
Let's see here. Sorry, I was just looking through the list. Burgoon.
Cameron Percy. Yeah, they don't really stand out for me, and I can kind of do a dive in why, but it's kind of going to be the usual, the long-term adjusted around, too many miscuts in web.com.
I have zero conviction on these guys. Outside, I like the Vegas. I like him. Camilo, I like a lot. That's the one guy that's.
Yeah, I mean, I can see him being up there for sure. Stanley's probably the third in this tier. The other two that are one, repeat offender Johnson Wagner is still here. I think he continues to post pretty good results, and yet he still stays in this bargain basement every time. I think he's climbed from all of 5,900 ever, but still eminently affordable.
He's got the best DraftKings pitcher of all time with the stash.
The stash.
Oh yeah, that is a pretty power stat. Yeah, that's a power stash for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we had a newcomer this week in the lower tier, Martin Laird, who I hadn't heard from I don't think I've ever picked him in the lower tier. And I was trying to figure out what's going on with him. Decent course history, 3 out of 3 in the 5-year window, made cuts. It's pretty much a purely course history play because his recent form hasn't been that great. So that kind of gets into that 50-50, how much do you weight course history? But
with Wagner, real quick, Colin, he's popping for you. He missed 6 straight cuts to start the year. That doesn't weight him down. I mean, if you look at his game log right now, let's see here. Out of the last 14 events, he's missed 8 cuts.
Yeah, so again, that's the time weighting of your results. So after the missed cuts, it's
He has a nice streak.
Yeah, again, so it's that streak, and again, that. Yeah, it's the time weighting of results.
Right.
Is the way that it shakes out there.
Okay.
I do believe recent form is more. Is it enough to overwhelm the 8 straight cuts? According to generic rules, yes, it is. So
Okay.
Again, that's the age-old question of am I did something change and am I picking up on it fast enough? Let's see, other super cheap guys. Stuart Sink, who keeps withdrawing, but he's kind of one of those. I think he's the closest to a decent value cash game play. And then the sub 6K range, the 2 guys that are popping for me this week are Jason Gore and Scott Langley. If you really want to fill out superstars and scrubs. I don't think I've seen before, but I don't know, kind of doing a half, I don't know, it's all that once you get into this range, it's kind of there's so much noise to begin with that it's I don't know how confident I am once you get below 6K, but decent flyers for sure.
One other guy that we saw earlier in the year that is intriguing to me, and I might throw him on a tournament. I was very impressed just watching him. No idea what he's going to look like, but Lee McCoy was an amateur when he played last on the PGA Tour at the Valspar, and he took fourth. And he had great composure. Everything was right. He said all the right things. Just seemed sharp. And again, this is a total flyer, 6,700. Wouldn't hate Lee McCoy in a tournament.
Yeah, no, as a flyer, I like him, especially because, like, God, his results are so sparse. But, like, the one thing that, like, all right, all else being equal gives you hope is that, like, the last one he played at was at Valspar. He took fourth.
Yeah, which is incredible for an amateur.
Right. So there's something there. And he definitely pops disproportionately high. Like, I would have mentioned him, but he's such an outlier here that, like, I just can't mention that much of an outlier in good faith.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. One question on this value tier, and we'll wrap it up after that. I'm curious if you guys look at Vegas odds and some of these other statistics that measure upside, or some of these, like Dustin Johnson has implied odds of 14.3%. That's nearly double anyone else. But did you get to these lower price golfers, you're talking like a tenth of a percentage point of winning the tournament. Is it just not important once we get to the lower tier guys? Because if you look at, there's like some things you can find, like Peter Malnati, he's min price, he's 5 for almost min price. And so all these guys around him have 0.1% odds to win the tournament. He's at 0.4. I get his super small difference between the two, but is that enough to like make a guy intriguing, or is just Vegas odds are only important for the top guys?
I have not. That's like, once you get into odds at that point, it's like that. I think you're more getting in the range of like 7 decimal point illusion accuracy, and like I just don't roster sub 6K guys enough to have a strong opinion out one way or another. Okay. So it'd be your guess as good as mine, but just like it's like what is the difference between 500 to 1 and 750 to 1 at some point? I don't think I can tell the difference.
I certainly can't tell the difference, and sometimes you'll see some big line movement on some of these guys. And remember, a lot of times when it's a big line move on someone that you haven't really heard of, or
just a bet,
it's just someone firing on them. So it's tough, but it's definitely intriguing. And I have not cracked the code. I need to get. I think one area of my DFS golf game that needs to get better is really figuring out a process of getting better at picking these really cheap guys. Some of the best guys seem to be doing a much better job than me.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Well, I think we've had a good discussion of these top guys. We'll end it as we usually do with pick who's going to win. Colin, who's going to win?
Can I pick Patrick Reed again, even though he's not in the field?
Yeah, well, you said you were going to pick him this week. Yeah. So that's fair.
I don't know. Let's go. No, let's go my weird mid-ticker, Hudson Swafford, just because he's up there and I needed deep cuts. Like, yeah.
All right, I'll go the same price, and I'll go DFS favorite Will Wilcox. Be a homer.
No, that's practically cheating. Like, all right, I'll allow it. That's fine.
The other guy that I actually liked a lot this week, and who's going to be in a lot of my GPP tournament lineups, and actually has way more equity than the guys we just named, is Harris English. He's already won here, but I like the way he's turning it around. I think. Yeah,
I couldn't pick English because I've been on his I was on the English train like the last 2 or 3 weeks. I figure I have to give someone else a ride.
Yeah, I definitely I'm all about Harris English this week.
Nice.
All right, sounds good. We will end it there. Next week, U.S. Open, we're going to have a ton of stuff, ton of content. We're going to do our regular podcast. We're going to have a live show like we did for the Masters. So I think we're all excited for that, yeah?
Oh, yeah, pumped.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Millie Maker, obviously, next week. So a lot of huge tournaments. We're going to put a ton of our resources and time into breaking that down for you and taking questions and interacting with you guys. And just a good week of U.S. Open. Majors are always fun, and it'll be good. So tune in next week, and we'll get into that for sure.
Reminder, FantasyLabs is 1 for 1 so far about making actual millionaires on these majors. So, hopefully we can continue that streak.
No pressure.
That's true. Yep. In the history of FantasyLabs DFS golf, a user has won a Millionaire Maker 100%.
We are undefeated, as a service in the Millionaire Maker. That is true.
You can't argue against those stats.
No, it's just science.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, thanks for listening, everyone. Colin, Pete, thanks for joining me. Good luck this week in both Euro and PGA. We'll talk to you guys next week for the U.S. Open.